in the Queen's Silver Jubilee year, 1977, when I was asked to go and interview him for a journal. But I did actually know Hardy Amies quite well, and he asked me to write the book which you see there. And the reason, really, I'm not promoting my books by this, the publishers and I thought long and hard about the cover, and we thought that these encapsulated the two styles of the two designers very well. On the left you see the what is actually a short evening dress for a private client made in 1965 of a chocolate-coloured silk dull satin. But the point to note is this extraordinary embroidery of the bodice. Unlike most London designers, Marschner maintained an embroidery workroom for nearly all of his career, and at its height he had 40 ladies sitting in the workroom embroidering pieces such as this, two working on one piece which had obviously been cut out first and was then assembled into a dress. And it's partly that style which appealed to the ladies of the royal family because it gave a dress exclusivity. Hardy Amies, on the other hand, approached design from a completely different point of view. Whereas Marschner said, "I despise simplicity, it's the negation of all that is beautiful," although he could do simple if needed, Hardy Amies was always striving to get the best out of tailoring and cutting and achieve the most simple of lines. And I think you see that exemplified in this coat of 1965. So those are the two designers about whom I'm going to give you a brief survey, because in total they designed for the Queen together for 94 years, so I can do no more than give you the briefest outline of why they were chosen and why their clothes were so successful for the Queen in what she calls going about my business, because obviously as a sovereign her clothes are not just representational and not just made to be fit for the occasion, but they have to reflect her own personality. And although it's often said that the Queen has no interest in clothes, I know that's completely untrue, having seen correspondence that's gone between the designers and the Queen. She's very interested in the look of clothes. She would often ask Hardy Amies to send over samples of the latest fabrics for her to look at. And of course, before any royal tour or any event planned for the future, they would be sent a complete list of what was needed and where it would be worn. They would then design for those occasions, sometimes 2 or 3 designs to be selected by the Queen and discussed with her. And she obviously had a very large input into what she wanted and what she wore. Well, here is a very brief overview of the Queen, which covers, as you see, all the decades of her reign. From she acceded to the throne in 1952, she was crowned in June 53, but obviously the grand addresses for state occasions, as you see on the left, and then the coats, all followed the outline of what was fashionable, but they were all given a twist which made them somehow completely her and hers. And to delineate again the differences between the two designers, on the left you have Marschner in his wonderful 1935 Armaderne salon, photographed again in the 60s with his main members of staff. At his height in the 50s he employed 550 people, so it was an enormous business. It didn't depend upon the royal family for its existence. He produced 2 collections a year, as did Hardy Amies, who you see on the right, photographed by Norman Parkinson in the latter years of the 1980s. And I think you can see the difference between the two men. Marschner, who had a chauffeur-driven Rolls-Royce and saw himself as the doyen of London designers, which he certainly was, and Amies, who was much more dashing, drove a sports car, had a completely different attitude to design and living. excuse me, I've got a bit of a cough. I'm showing you this now because this is the Queen's coronation dress of 1953, probably one of the most famous dresses of the mid-20th century. And I'm showing it because most people have no concept of what the Queen actually means in our Constitution. The Queen is not only Queen of the United Kingdom, but she's also Queen of 16 other states. She's also head of the Commonwealth and 32 independent states, head of the Church, the armed forces and the judiciary. Thank you. She has obviously very defined constitutional powers. She's restrained from an awful lot of what might be called interference in politics. She's above politics, but she has the right to consult and to be consulted, which is why the Prime Minister, her Prime Minister, goes to see her once a week, and after all these years, she's known to be a fount of wisdom and to give good advice if called upon. She also signs all parliamentary bills after scrutiny into being acts of Parliament, and she has the sole right to declare war on another state. In other words, she guarantees the liberties of the British people, and she is hugely significant in that respect. I think that abroad people don't really realise that. They certainly don't seem to realise it anymore in Britain. They're not taught about the Constitution. But that is a fact. And it is this fact which both designers bore in mind when they designed for her. Well, who were they? First of all, Norman Hartnell, in looking at that dress, was something of a fashion historian himself. Hardy Amis was very keen on fashion history. And one of the dresses he looked at for designing the coronation dress was this portrait at Hatfield House by Isaac Oliver of Queen Elizabeth I. When the Queen came to the throne, there was I'm so sorry. There was much written in the press about a new Elizabethan era, and I can remember that very well. In fact, the opening opera at Covent Garden for her reign was Gloriana by Benjamin Britten. So it was to dresses like this that Hartnell looked to get inspiration for designing the coronation dress. If you notice the bodice, he was particularly interested in the floral motifs. I'm not going to go into all the mythology about this dress because there are very learned articles about it. But I would just mention the eyes and the ears which you see embroidered upon it, which denote that the Queen saw and heard everything in her kingdom. And yesterday when I showed this to Melissa, I was suddenly reminded that about 3 months after I'd started my biography of Amis, someone who'd spent a weekend in a house party at Windsor telephoned me to say, oh, the subject of Hardy Amis came up, and the Queen said she knew somebody was writing a biography of him. So, quite amazingly, the word gets round, and the Queen, even though she's in her 80s, still hears things and sees things. So it's a very interesting thought that over the generations of sovereigns, this same idea carries on. There's young Hartnell, aged about 4. He was born an Edwardian of Victorian aspirational parents. They owned a pub which was far from socially acceptable, i.e. an inn. His mother served behind the bar. But father was a very hard-working man and progressed into the liquor business, sent his son off to a boarding school from which he went to Cambridge to read modern languages. And like a lot of very bright British Cambridge graduates or undergraduates, he joined the Footlights Club and acted. In fact, he never completed his course, but as you see him there in the bottom right of the picture on the right, he designed all the productions and the clothes and wore them. And it was actually that which got him into fashion. At that time, London had no leading fashion designers as young men. There were either department stores or very august establishments, or dressmakers, small dressmakers known as court dressmakers, of whom there were several hundred, which just meant that if you were going to be presented at court, which was in those days the be-all and end-all of society, you could go there and be assured that you would get the right sort of clothes. Well, Hartnell's first clients were the sisters and mothers of his friends at Cambridge. And you can see that he very soon evolved a style that was completely his own, part of the Jazz Age, very sophisticated. The dress on the left was made for Anne Messel, the mother of Anthony Armstrong Jones, who later married Princess Margaret and became Lord Snowdon. And on the right is a dress for the film star Bibi Daniels. Hartnell very early dressed stage and film set designs, and you see there that he's already cottoned on to the fact that designing embroideries makes the dress not only exclusive but expensive, which is after all what being in business is all about, to make a profit. Well, here is a sketch by Lavery for a now vanished painting of a court of 1930. Courts, as you see, were regularly held. London really did swing. It was an amazingly popular city. Mayfair was still inhabited by people living in private houses. Their daughters were presented as debutantes at court. Young marrieds were presented. There were diplomatic occasions. In the centre you see George V and Queen Mary sitting there. So this gives you an idea of what a lot of his glamorous dresses were made for. And the fact is they were obviously recognised by the royal family for what they were, because the dressmakers' names were always printed after the event in the papers. The other way with which he attained this popularity and a reputation for being able to handle public display was with weddings. And here you see top left Una Guinness, one of the three daughters of the Guinness brewing family. Hartnell studied designs in the National Gallery, and he transformed all his brides into street theatre by creating these extraordinary dresses. If you note at the bottom it says Victorian dresses. That's significant because of his later career in the 30s. And that's an existing example of one of the dresses of the period. You see the Marguerite pattern, which was one that he favoured for very many wedding dresses, and you also see that it's based on a medieval design, as he would have put it. Well, he soon knew that, like Charles Frederick Worth, his hero, he had to go to Paris and show his wares, and this he did. And Maine Bochet, who was editor of Vogue, went up to him after the show and said he'd never seen so many beautiful dresses, but so badly made. So Hartnell immediately invested in a French cutter and a French fitter, and the business, of course, flourished even more. One of the reasons he also wanted to show in Paris was because American buyers tended to go there before they went to see what London might have. So he was very successful. This is a dress of 1932. You can see that the embroideries are very sophisticated, just paillettes, stars and crescents. And because of that, he got 5 windows on Fifth Avenue at Best & Company, opposite St. Patrick's Cathedral. It doesn't exist anymore, but it was a toehold in America for him. Well, then his first royal break came with the wedding of the third son of King George and Queen Mary, the Duke of Gloucester, to Lady Alice Montagu Douglas Scott, daughter of the Duke of Beaufort. Here she is in her oyster pink satin wedding dress, photographed by Madame Yvonne, who was a pioneer of colour photography, just round the corner from Hartnell in Berkeley Square. And it was to be a huge wedding in Westminster Abbey, but Hartnell was very discomforted because her mother died. The family went into mourning, and it was a small wedding in the chapel at Buckingham Palace. But what it did do, apart from providing him with the opportunity to provide the trousseau seen on the left, the two princesses, daughters of the Duke and Duchess of York, came to the salon for their bridesmaids' dresses. And this, of course, brought in the Duchess of York, and after the debacle of the abdication, she became queen, consort to George VI. And I should think most of you have seen the King's Speech, the film, so you know roughly what was involved with all that. Well, she had dressed at this august establishment run by Madame Handley Seymour, where Queen Mary also dressed. She had dressed as well a little in Paris, but the coronation dress was given to Madame Handley Seymour, but she did give the design of the Maids of Honour's dresses to Hartnell. So if you look at the right-hand picture, you can see that they're in a fashionable, fairly close-fitted dress, but Hartnell gives them a twist by a folded train going to one side with embroideries, so they were highly visible going down the aisle. So that was his first real moment of royal design, which was seen in public in Westminster Abbey. Then came many other commissions, and the King suggested to Hartnell that the Queen's image could be refashioned. And I'm telling you this because obviously the young Princess Elizabeth was very aware of what was going on and saw her mother evolving into this wonderful sort of ethereal creation, here photographed by Cecil Beaton, in one of the dresses made for the state visit to Paris in 1938, when he had 2 weeks to change all the dresses from various colours into white, which he remembered was the prerogative for royal mourning, as her mother had died. But he managed it. And the next year he created another wardrobe for the royal tour of Canada and a visit to the United States, all on the eve of war, all good propaganda, so much so that Adolf Hitler called her the most dangerous woman in Europe in her Hartnell outfits. There's a design on the left by Hartnell for the Queen, one of very many hundreds, which shows a fashionable outline of the period, but with the extra items such as draped sleeves, which nobody else would have worn. And on the right, the other silhouette he evolved for her, the slender rising slim silhouette. Well, now came the war and austerity and rationing. The Queen was rationed like everybody else. She reused old clothes. Hartnell himself was asked to design for a company called Burkatex for utility dresses which conform to rationing. You see 3 on the right. And this style lasted throughout the war and was very familiar to the young Princess Elizabeth, who in 1944 was 18, wore her first evening dresses, which were cut down Hartnells from before the war, belonging to her mother. 1947, they set out on their first royal tour, which was to South Africa and southern Rhodesia, and you can see how the picture on the right shows the Queen in Paris in 1938, and on the left in South Africa. He's refashioned a crinoline for her, but the two princesses are wearing what are really fairly standard day dresses of the period, just better made and made of better fabrics. Again, the coats, the hats, the print dresses on the right, all again fairly typical of what a young woman from a fairly affluent family would have worn. So no huge change there, and also fairly much in tune with what a grown-up woman of more mature years would have worn. The change really came in 1947, later in the year, when the Princess Elizabeth was engaged to Lieutenant Philip Mountbatten. You see there a dress which conforms to the utility standards of the time. It's got a little bit of draping and a few ribbons, but it's basically very simple. And it's not unlike the dresses worn by the Queen today. She's come full circle, really. The dress that really was outstanding was for her wedding in November of 1947, and it's the Princess line, which reflects Dior's new look of January of the same year, And you see again these marguerites, which are a favourite motif of Hartnell's for embroideries. And the neckline was created in tune with what the princess wanted. Princess Margaret in a bridesmaid's dress for that wedding, again sprinkled with marguerites. And on the right, an image of the ladies working in the embroidery workroom, which was such an asset to Hartnell's business. I just put this in because Hartnell, having opened in 1923, in 1948 his business was 25 years old, and he made this dropped crinoline for the Queen, who was celebrating her 25th wedding anniversary with the King. Well, the great change really came when the King became very ill, and the World Tour of 1951 was cancelled, and the Princess Elizabeth and the Duke of Edinburgh went in the stead of the royal couple and were a huge success. And there she is wearing an off-the-peg dress for a barn dance, but it begins to express a new freedom and a style of her own. You compare it with the look seen down below on the far right, where she's not really all that differently dressed from her mother with the heavy hats and shoes of the period. February 52, King George VI died, and she really did come into her own. This is a paper taffeta dress by Hartnell on the left, called the carriage leaf dress. Later in the year, for a Royal Film Command performance, Hartnell designed a very simple, what he called magpie dress, because he knew the film stars would be glittering with everything they could get their hands on to wear, and he wanted her to stand out, just wearing a few pieces of jewellery. But unfortunately the dress was copied overnight and on sale in shops the next day, so it was never seen again, I gather. But he was never one to give up on an idea. In 1957, the state visit to Paris, he redefined the idea for a coat for the Queen, and she's wearing it there, as you see on the left. And you also see that his ideas for crinolines, as on the right, were less austere and less rigid than those for Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, as she'd become. Well, now the coronation. Hartnell also looked at the coronation dress of the Queen's beloved grandmother, Queen Mary, and he did pick out some of the emblems of Britain, like the roses, for his 8 designs. In fact, there were 9, which he showed to the Queen, and she commented on all of them. And the final result you see on the right. He expected huge praise, because it was an enormous feat to get this very heavy dress not to list all over the place as somebody walked around in it. But all she said was glorious, and he was rather upset about that, because he thought he'd spent so much time designing it. But at her request and suggestion, it incorporated all the emblems of not only the United Kingdom, but the major countries of the Commonwealth: Canada, the maple leaf; Australia, the wattle, and so on. And there you see the full setting in Westminster Abbey of the coronation dress, and he designed the Maids of Honour's dresses seen behind, once again Maids of Honour's dresses, and he designed all the dresses for the major members of the royal family, which you see there. We don't have time to go into them all, but the point is, he was very good at dressing a tableau, setting a stage set. And these are the Maids of Honour's dresses, or one of them, embroidered with blossom and white flowers. He also designed new peeresses and peers' robes, because they're not the same robes as they're worn in the House of Lords. So he was very busy. Added to that, he had a coronation collection of some 200 dresses, of which this is one on the left, photographed by Norman Parkinson. And you can see it there today, and you see again the use of embroideries for a private client. Well, then in November 1953 came the big chance, and I'm coming on to Amos in a moment, big chance for Hartnell to design an enormous wardrobe for a tour which lasted around the Commonwealth from November 1953 to May 1954. Endless dresses, 24 tons of luggage went with the Queen. endless dresses for all climates and all occasions, because to be seen twice in the same dress could be deemed offensive by the person seeing it the second time. Why did she wear the same dress that she wore in Perth when she's in Brisbane, for example? And there you see how Hartnell played around with the designs. He made them all individual, but they all conformed to the fashionable silhouette at the time. But they were all different. They were not the sort of clothes that could be bought off the peg. And this is the packing list for some of the dresses, the location for the dresser, and they could see from the fabrics what was where. And another use of local colour, if you like, the wattle of Australia embroidered on this dress, also then seen in the portrait on the right, which, as a form of courtesy to the host country, became the norm, if I dare say it, for all the dresses thereafter for state visits. There you see her in day attire, and small hats, hemlines that do not rise above the knee when you sit down and they don't blow up, visibility of gloves, small hats so you can see the face from a distance, and matching hats and bags all became a formula that was to last and has lasted really until now. There she is in Nigeria in 1956, wearing chiffon in the heat, and you see how the interplay of design goes with the uniforms worn by the soldiers. That's another consideration that has to be taken into account. The other thing is that the Queen knew she was showing off British dressmaking abroad, and very largely, as far as possible, British textiles. So that came into the equation too, that she would only have the best quality and she would only expect the best quality. You see the evolution of style from the mid-50s on the left to the mid-60s on the right, and then to the 70s at the bottom. The colours and the fabrics get ever bolder as the Queen gains in confidence and the crowds become ever larger and she has to be seen. Whereas this is a dress for Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, made by Hartnell specially for this photo session in 1948, and I show it because, again, it shows how Hartnell could reinvent certain well-tried themes. This is 1956, the Queen at the then Royal Film Command performance, Marilyn Monroe in shimmering lame, as you see on the far right, but the Queen in dead black, relying on her beauty for her regal appearance, and of course magnificent jewellery. As I said to you, these emblems became used again and again. This is one of the most famous state dresses of the 50s for the state visit to Paris in 1957, worn at the Opera, and you can see again, clearly I hope, Hartnell's embroidery, which is based on the flowers of the field in French fields, and it ends with what was then a fashionable bouffant bow at the back. Similarly for Canada, and the sketch by his assistant Ian Thomas, who left to become the Queen's third designer in the 1960s, and was in many ways a much better sketch artist than Hartnell. And we've just heard about changing French fashion. Just to show you, Hardy is sitting on the far left, another famous British designer, Victor Steeble, next to him, Hartnell in the middle, and the young Yves Saint Laurent, and then Cecil Beaton sitting on the right at the French Embassy in London in 1958. So times were changing, youth was coming in, and the older men were having to reinvent themselves. 1960 in India, the Queen on the left wearing a Hartnell dress, and on the right one by Hardy Amis, who Hartnell had a much more reserved, rather nervous approach to the Queen. He was never very comfortable with her, I gather. Hardy Amis saw her more as a very elegant, rather sensual woman. His designs, as you see there, rather reflect that. Well, towards the end of Hartnell's life, the Queen came here to Bangkok and paid a visit to the King and the Queen. And as you see on the right, he used the yellow of the ribbon of the order with which she had been decorated by the King. So the whole idea has become much more simple in tune with changing fashion, where elaborate dress was no longer very fashionable. It's a very simple dress, just given that little bit of colour. And 1996, the Queen came here again wearing Hardy Amies, a many-layered green silk suit of a design evolved for her by John Moore, Hardy Amies's principal designer at the time, and one that is still carried on today. It's layered so that it doesn't crease and the Queen doesn't feel the heat so much. Young Amies had a similar background to Hartnell. He was born in the suburbs of London. His father went away to war, came back, and Amies went to school. He worked in, he didn't go to Cambridge because he failed his exams, but he went to learn languages abroad. And then he got a job at Le Chasse, simply because a friend of his mother's, who'd been a dressmaker, had a letter from him in which he described a dress he'd seen at a dance. And the owners of Le Chasse were looking for a new designer. The then designer, Digby Morton, had left to set up his own business. So Amies went there as business manager. But by the end of the year, he was also designing. And on the left, you see one of his first designs in Vogue. He was very soon sought after as a promising young designer, especially for very sophisticated suits that could be worn in London and not just in the countryside. During the war, he was in charge of special operations executive for Belgium, which traumatized him for a very long time, because Belgium was a very difficult country in which to send agents who were almost invariably done to death as soon as they arrived. But he came out of all that, set up his own business in 1946, and became very famous for his tailoring. These are two Norman Parkinson photographs, one of 1949 on the left, of a coat with a wraparound collar, and on the right you see Hardy Amies's own version of the new look, together with a Molyneux's coat at the National Gallery. But he could also do wonderful evening wear, as you see there, very sophisticated and very youthful. He seems to have first come to the attention of the royal family here in 1951 through one of the Princess Elizabeth's lady-in-waiting. So there you have her in a yellow Hardy Amies outfit, the Queen Elizabeth Queen Mother in Norman Hartnell as a contrasting style, the bride in an Amies wedding dress, and Queen Mary also wore Norman Hartnell clothes. So there's quite a representation. He had become noticed and had been commanded to make some designs for Princess Elizabeth, which she wore in Canada. As you can see, they're a rather more slinky, sexy look than Hartnell would have designed, less rigid and less formal. And he had a very good eye for what moved and how cut could change things. November 1952, the Queen not crowned but Queen, wearing a Hartnell three-tiered crinoline. Again, it's of cotton voile. It was designed for an abortive visit to Australia with her Commonwealth Prime Ministers. So you see, Amies's image of her is different, but it's still very appropriate in another sort of way. And they never collaborated, Amies and Hartnell. They didn't communicate as to who would design what. They were just asked to provide designs for a specific occasion and got on with it. The Royal Tour of 53 to 54, top left, that's an Amies white left dress in Australia. And on the return in Malta, where the Queen finally saw her children again, with the ever-elegant Lady Mountbatten on the right, she's wearing an Amies thunder blue silk coat. So he's now established as a good designer for her. By 59 in America, she's wearing an Amy's dress with a small portion of embroidery. Amy's didn't have an embroidery workroom. He would sketch a small design and send it off to Lock & Co., the equivalent in London of Lesage. And then for the tour, the state visit to Paris in 57, on the left a Hartnell dress and an Amy's dress, and the coat covering a dress worn by the Queen for the newly restored theatre at Versailles. Actually, Amy's designed a wonderful embroidered bodice for the dress underneath, but it was so cold that the Queen kept her coat shut. This is what happens to designers for the royal family. Their work is often not really seen. But he did design this, and this is a faded photo, but it's a brilliant peacock blue taffeta dress for the Queen with a serpentine embroidery that sort of snakes its way all round the skirt. And she said, "It's a rather blue colour, Mr. Amis." And he said, "Oh, Ma'am, now you are over 30, I think you can take strong colours." And from then on, he produced strong colours for her. Well, just to show that, the contrast, there's a suit by Hartnell, top left, a sort of flowery 50s confection. And then in the 60s, Amy's goes into brilliant scarlet, which kind of echoes the Queen there at the head of her troops on her official birthday. And there again, two coats. The one by Amy's on the left, absolutely dead straight. At that stage, she had begun to order directly from his collections, and then they'd be deleted from his collections because of economy. And on the right, a Hartnell coat, and you can see that it's a simple outline that Hartnell manages to get in a little decorative detail. He couldn't resist making a coat a little special. Well, for the Silver Jubilee of 1977, this is the famous pink coat with the hat with 25 bells on it, worn for the celebratory service at St. Paul's Cathedral. It's loosely draped, and it was a new look evolved at Amy's for the Queen, largely evolved by Ken Fleetwood, who designed for the Queen since 1960. Although the Queen affected not to know that when he went to her in 1985. She wrote Amy's a trite little note saying she was surprised to see Mr. Fleetwood. How long had he been there? Since 1951 was the answer. And there's a coat on the left. Again, very simple. It could almost have been worn by anybody, really, with one of the Queen's many hats that are made to be seen. And on the right, the continuation of the softer look, the outfit worn for the christening of Prince William in 1982. Amy's, as I said, very astute businessman. You can see there his sports car, an ad for Cadillac, and his playing with ideas for evening dresses. There's a wraparound one here, which she later wore for the state visit of General de Gaulle. Two state visit dresses there by Amy's, the one on the left worn in Germany in 68, the right one loose and flowing for the Middle East in 76. And a contrast in styles bottom right with the Duchess of Windsor in 1972, and the Queen in a very highly patterned fabric of the period. Finally, the very famous poppy dress, designed for the state visit to California and dinner with President Reagan, which she subsequently wore in Downing Street. And I put this in at the end because Amy's never designed for Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. He always found her rather stiff with him and felt she didn't really like him. But she was always very true to Hartnell. Well, Norman Parkinson was asked to take the photographs of the Queen Mother's 80th birthday, and Princess Margaret, without telling either the Queen or the Queen Mother, ordered the 3 blue satin cloaks you see below. And so that is the only time that the Queen Mother was persuaded to wear a Hardy Amis outfit. And I think you can see in the top left the different styles which had evolved over the years, and how the Queen came to have what was really her own style, and it continues until today. Sorry I'm a little bit longer than I intended, but thank you very much for listening.